the interesting things is I was talking to a member of the Pueblo community there, and they were talking about, as much as they could tell me about some of the stuff happening in the Jiva, but they're very careful about who they reveal their esoteric mysteries to. Lawrence was one of them. They actually invited him to engage in some of their secret rituals involving peyote and whatnot, back before that became a thing. But then also Carl Jung came to Taos at one point. He was invited there by D'Angelo. They saw Jung, and here he is, he's this Swiss guy in a three-piece suit, and they're like, that's it, we know you're a mystic, come here. And they were like showing him they like basically took him down into the heart, like 8 layers down into the Pueblo, and were telling him how, they have to perform some of these rituals and what the inner meaning of them is. So one of the first initiatory rites is actually living underground for some period and learning how to grow an ear of corn without sun. And it's like an albino, all-white ear of corn. And you're like, why? Well, there's some inner meaning to that. And they talked to Jung about this, and I thought that was marvelous. And it just really said something to me about how, we need this art of discernment, not just about things external to us, but also discernment about other people, discernment about who is serious and who is not serious upon the path. And yeah, it was all very interesting, but there's this weird kind of like spiritual vortex happening there in Taos.
I've heard that.
I mean, of course, any place that like Lawrence, Edward Abbey, Jeffers, Carl Jung, Stravinsky was there and was inspired. Any place that these people can all be inspired has to have something about it. And I certainly felt it.
Yeah, it speaks well for them, for the place.
So, Larry, back to your story. The shop owner gave you, what was it?
Oh, it was a bottle of supplements of some kind, dietary supplements that I had expressed interest in, and I sort of decided not to get it because it was a little bit expensive.
I see.
And so since I declined to purchase it, and he said, well, that won't do, I assume, in his own.
Yes, right.
And, he gave it to me, and he told me why.
He told you it was because he was rich?
Yeah, he didn't say because, I really like you or anything like that.
Or because you need this.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't, it was quite simply that he was celebrating that he considered himself rich.
Always nice to celebrate.
Yes. So I was impressed. I was struck in a similar way to when Gray Henry said she could fax my resume to somebody in Cairo and he could give me a job so I could live there for a while. And, I said that I'm a little uncomfortable about that. He doesn't know me.
Right.
I might or might not be well suited for what and she said, no, you don't understand. He can do this and he would love to have an opportunity. And suddenly I realized it was a whole other economy of giving rather than taking.
Interesting.
There's a lot more joy in giving than there is in taking.
There sure is. You don't get familiar with joy unless you're giving, because you don't know how much is available.
Right.
Until you try to give it away.
And then there's also that kind of giving in which you're giving something that you really like. It could be something small or big, but giving it to someone without expecting anything back. And that thing that you yourself really like is another level of giving.
Yes. Well, I remember being cautioned that in some countries you should think twice about admiring something too loudly because they'll give it to you.
They'll feel obligated to give it to you.
And I think Eastern culture is like that too. So if someone visits your home and they like the rug that's on the floor and they're like, oh, this is a really nice rug, then what usually happens is that rug ends up being in their house.
Yes, right.
Yes, it's on a journey. It just happens to be there for a while.
Just like us.
I've actually had that happen a few times in my travels to the East. in Morocco, I've had it happen that, I would, let's say, just compliment someone on something, and then suddenly, it's offered to me and I refuse 3 times, the customary 3 times, but then if it's offered the 4th time, you have to take it, otherwise then...
Yeah, it's really rude, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, very interesting thing. And of course, it's not a universal role, but in a lot of my travels, I found that the less a person has, the more generous they tend to be.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Actually, there have been studies about that, and that rule does hold.
Interesting.
I guess it could be because there's no fear of loss as far as the things they possess is concerned, because they know they're not going to take away these things or possessions with them in reality. And so the fear that one normally has with a lot of possessions, a lot of properties, a lot of wealth, a lot of children, isn't necessarily there.
Well, the thing is, a lot of times, people who accumulate a lot of wealth, it's because they love the wealth. And, and wealth is kind of a one-dimensional quality, money is. And you're losing what's valuable to you if you're generous. You're giving away what matters to you. So the element of attachment is really important there. But if you, live a more frugal way, there might be a few sentimental things that you're attached to, but, I think you tend to learn to live without that kind of dependency on stuff.
I don't know if there is a proverb, but something comes to mind that we use a lot in the East, which is, when it comes to giving, give like a king. When it comes to taking, take like a beggar.
Yeah, that's good.
While I was down in Taos, I visited a Benedictine monastery, and, I wanted to get there some new, just to visit them and maybe make a donation, get some Gregorian chants that I hadn't had. But I've always say that Gregorian chants are marvelous, but I listened to the same 45-minute CD on repeat on a 25-hour ride down and a 25-hour ride back. So for 50 hours on repeat, and I didn't get bored of it. Give me any modern music or even most classical music, I'd get bored, but the Gregorian chanting, never. But while I was there, I got this icon, and I think it's relevant to what we're talking about here. It's from Saint Lorenzo, and Saint Lorenzo is one of my favorites because aside from D.H. Lawrence going by Lorenzo, Saint Lorenzo is patron saint of both the poor and the librarians, and Lorenzo distributed all his wealth to the poor, but the Roman prefect demanded that Lorenzo give his wealth to him. So Lorenzo brought all of his money to the poor, saying, "This is the wealth of the church." And the prefect had Lorenzo roasted on a gridiron, and Lorenzo said, "Turn me over. I'm done on this side."
Right, yes. I mean, I know that because my name is Lawrence.
You're Lawrence.
I looked him up. Yeah, it's a pretty unusual symbol to have a saint carry.
The gridiron?
Yeah. Can you say detachment?
That does come to mind, There is no body.
Well, at least not permanently. But, assuming the story is true, the solid certainty and inner peace that, he didn't get that alarmed really tells you something. If he really could experience that and sort of make a joke about it, that's really amazing.
Yes, and it's somehow rather typical of martyrs, is it not?
Well, it's true. They do accept their fates, usually. But yeah, I mean,
they're special people to start with.
Yes. And I wouldn't say they never cried out in their pain or distress. And I don't know if St. Lawrence did either, but it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter.
Like Ramana Maharshi, when he was dying, this is a story I heard anyway, that he was, the cancer was well advanced and he was going downhill. And he had a lot of pain and either cried out or gasped or something in pain. And one of his followers said, I thought you would be, above that or, and he said, "I'm not suffering, but the body is having a hard time."
Yes, that's right. That's wonderful. And I've heard that of the Maharshi before.
That reminds me of some of the other martyrs that have gone to death on the flames. You know, in their last gasp, one of them, I think it was either Giordano Bruno or Margaret Ferret. Both of them went to death with a smile on their face, but someone was saying, wait, this proves you're wrong. You're screaming. And they said, no, the body cries out in pain. The soul is crying out in joy.
That's good too.
Yes, I did not know that one. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah, it should be no surprise that the body who lives in the realm of pain and pleasure would notice.
Yes. Well, that brings us to our first question today.
That is right.
It does? Oh, I see.
What is the relation between body, mind, and soul?
Got me. There's obviously a relationship, but I'm not sure I know what it is. But I suspect in that vocabulary, you know, I would place soul as most significant. And mind and body, they might be on an equal level, or mind might be above it, or I don't know. Depends on the aspect you're looking at.
Well, body and mind are two of the things we oh so often mistake for being ourselves.
Yes.
Instead of our soul.
Right, whatever that is, consider that, the reality.
Yes, that which, yes, exactly, participates in the divine. So I'm not sure what the relation is between them, but again, the body and the mind are two of the things we tend to mistake for ourselves. They are determinedly separate.
Right. And we tend to think that the body contains the mind, contains the soul, or something like that, whereas it necessarily has to be somehow in the other order.
Yes, right. But that's sort of the modern empirical view of things.
Right. The body contains the mind, and if there's a soul, contains that.
Yes, and that's one of the first things the philosophers and the mystics want to dismiss, this notion of the body being something that it's not.
Yeah, well, yeah. And actually, in some of the writings of the Fourth Way, it appears that they're saying that if you haven't, developed or been given a higher consciousness, that, you don't even have a soul, that what is nourished spiritually is the soul. And so, it's an interesting point of view. It has its validity, but that struck me. It's sort of like people want to talk about, the state of their souls as if they had one, that kind of thing.
Are we getting at what you intended with this question, Seda Badria?
It's a pretty open-ended question, so I was hoping simply for some open-ended answers wherever it would take us.
Well, I think we're being pretty open-ended. Seda Zaidab, would you like to contribute to our openness here?
Well, I think we have summed up pretty well. If I was to add anything, it would be just that the body exists to the perception of the mind, and so does the soul. But in reality, they all exist in relation to each other, but not to the one who's whole.
Oh, you mean it's not that way for one who is whole?
Correct, yes.
All right. I didn't parse that right first time.
Neither did I. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure I can repeat it from word to word now.
No, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
We've
I think
received it.
that's good to know.
Just what I would have to say is simply that sometimes we tend to see this disparaging of the body. Oh, the body's not real. The body doesn't exist. Only the spirit's real. Only the spirit exists. And clearly there's some validity to that, but I tend to take maybe a different perspective. I would simply say the body is just as real as anything else, and it should be respected as much as anything else should be, because the body is just the embodiment, the materialization of the spirit. Spirit is the potentiality and the body is the actuality. It's just simply the spirit finding a form within the ever-living eternal flux. And depending on the tradition you look at, one basically takes many, almost infinite number of material forms before they can escape that and attain to the realm of the pure spirit, whatever that means. Because even our concepts of thinking, even the words I'm using now, rely on a strange combination of electrical, mechanical, biological forces and whatnot. And the mind is both soul and body. And so all the concepts we have are by nature embodied, and anything that's outside of that is something different. You know, you have to ask, does a bodiless entity, does it think? I'm sure it does. I'm sure the angels and God and the less tangible creatures, elves, fairies, whatnot, I'm sure they think, but I don't think they think like us. I think it's different. Just like I think the dolphins have supreme levels of intelligence, but they don't think the same way we do. So if and when one transitions to a more subtle realm of existence, one has to be prepared for something almost painful. And in that sense, maybe one could even say that painfully rendering the body from the soul, such as happens with martyrs, might actually help them on the way.
Yeah, it certainly could and should. But you know, the soul taking on form is interesting, that at least from our personal experience, one of the form we're most aware of usually is our bodies. But you know, even though our bodies change, they don't change quite the same way the mind does. You know, the interesting thing about the mind is that it can take on so many forms quickly and unpredictably. So I think, you know, the mind has to be taken seriously, but not too seriously. And the body too. I mean, there's a reason that some spiritual teachers use the term body mind, because it, you know, they're both the same kind of thing. They seem to be inseparable.
If one refers to them together, but they're part of the illusion.
Yeah, well, and even the knowledge of the body occurs in the mind, as it were.
Yes, exactly.
It's our mind that tells us that we are our body. And you know how much you can trust your mind by now, I imagine.
Right. No, and so much of the spiritual life is getting past the illusion that the body is ourselves or that the mind is ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, the mind just tells us who it thinks we are.
The mind really just does a lot of interpreting the senses.
Well, yes, it does that. But one of the things that I think of in this context is the notion that it is the mind that seems to provide the very concept of self. And there is something that Ramana Maharshi said about, you know, something like the most amazing or incredible thing is that the mind inserts a subject in everything it interprets. So there's a presupposition that there is an I who's having the experience. And that's another good Maharshi thing. You could say the fundamental error is that the mind presupposes the existence of the subject before everything else. So it's, you know, never laughing, it's always I'm laughing. Where did the I come from? It's an assumption, or presumption, as he would have it. So what about body, mind, and soul? Or maybe I'm done.
Yes, maybe I'm done too. Theta Badria?
I said my say.
Then you're done too.
If God is one and being is one, are we already unified with God, or is that something we need to achieve?
Well, of course we're already unified with God.
Right. I mean, there's only one.
I ask this question because even in a lot of the non-dualist texts, it talks about achieving unity with the divine.
Yes, that's true. But it's really realizing it rather than achieving it. But you may have to achieve disabusing yourself of a lot of misunderstandings before you can be aware of it.
Yes, as you say, you need to achieve disabusing yourself.
Right, exactly.
And is that something to be achieved? Well, you know, I suppose, but most of the non-dual literature, at least the direct path literature, doesn't like to talk about doing things in the future or needing to make progress.
Right.
Instead of be here now.
Yes, exactly.
One.
Yes. I mean, you know, if there's a one, then it's not two. But not two doesn't have to include there's a one, but it kind of implies it.
Any more on that one?
Not for me.
No. I mean, how could we not be unified with God? You know, if you start with that question. Yeah. And it also depends on what unified means. If it implies the two coming together, then it's not quite right. But if it implies that there's no possibility in reality of separation, then that works.
And do you say to Badria?
I would say one of the miracles of the unity is the reality of multiplicity, the many and the one.
Well, that's true. I mean, the one is both absolute and infinite. We have diversity so that we can have infiniteness, infinity. Time is, I don't know who said this, and I'm sure it was probably said as a joke, but it's true too, that time is the way God keeps everything from happening at once.
Yes.
It allows, a body to be exactly at a certain place, and also another body to also be there in a place. And that would be contradictory except for time. So in a way, time is a way of spreading out reality into a multiplicity. So pretty amazing.
Yes. Any more on that one?
I don't have any more, but there's only a minute and a half left before you have to go, so I'm not sure we'll be able to fully answer the next question.
That sounds like a challenge. So what shall we do with our remaining 45 seconds?
Well, we could try to answer this question.
All right.
Is the soul conscious, or is consciousness purely a matter of the mind? No, the soul is conscious. It's consciousness itself. The mind is not conscious, evidenced by the fact that one knows thoughts, but thoughts don't know one.
Yes.
So no to the purely matter of mind.
Yeah. See, that was quick.